So I'm a California native software developer specializing in scalable solutions. I went to college for engineering, found out I'm brilliant at programming, not to beat my own horn, but got hired out of college before I could finish the degree, 160 units, no formal degrees. I started programming in 5.5 with my $50 coupon from Borland. Trying to think of what name it was at the time. And I've dabbled in other languages, extensive beating the crap out of Excel, which is what you use a lot of when you're trying to proof of concept, a lot of formulas for stock market stuff. My first professional job was in 1992 when I got hired straight out of college before I could even finish. Went to work for Toshiba for a year and a half for 2.5 years in 1993 because I didn't think the stock market software company was going to go anywhere, and it did. But the big thing is I spent most of my life building my own tools and occasionally throwing some third-party things in there. So I'm not afraid of the low-level stuff. And I've had a lot of fun with Halloween, using Delphi for Halloween projects, and also in there.
I think, okay, I think I fixed the audio now, although it says I'm redlining, so we'll see what happens. All right, so this is Too Many Gyms. Never too many gyms, Jim Hunter. Hold on. So they said they're not getting any sound now, so give me just 1 second here. So it shows the. I'm looking at the audio levels right now, and it shows them all going out. Why is this? It says they're all okay. All right, so maybe we'll just have to go to manual switching of unmuting. So
Either that or go ahead. All right. Yeah, I used to be a DJ in the 80s too. I didn't put that on my card for parties, not for weddings. That was hard. So I'm going to just start over real quick because the thing that we're going to talk about is this atomic level of the stock market data. Now, so basically, you have a guy that makes a decision. He wants to buy a stock. He puts an order into through his execution software. It goes to the exchange. It shows up in the book of bids and offers. You know what price, how many shares he wants to do, which is 22,000 deep on each side at any given time. And I'm hearing something. I think I'm hearing your speaker, Jim. Sorry. So the thing is that he places the order. Okay, so he places his order. It shows up in the level 2 quotes. The exchange matches the order to another order if it makes sense. There's different types of order. I'm oversimplifying, but the best bid in that book and the best offer on that book is what shows up on Google when you go to Google Finance and you see the bid and offer price. There's a lot of depth and a lot of different prices and sizes underneath that. So that's your level 1 quote. And then when there's a price is agreed upon, that becomes a trade. That comes out as a trade in the time and sale that some of you may or may not have heard of. And like I was saying earlier, which I don't know if I got through, there's hundreds of thousands of those potentially on stocks every day. There's hundreds of thousands of trades every day, but there's about an 18-to-1 ratio of how many bid and offer updates there are relative to the stocks. So one symbol can have millions of updates on its market data in one day. And we're talking about stocks. So that is, if somebody has a good question up there, read it and just jump in and throw it at me, Ian or Jim. So the thing is that you're talking about a lot of transactions every day going on. Now, to be fair, 80% of the activity in the stock market is like 10 to 20% of the stocks. And in the old days, they used to be able to put big trades through. So they could put through 100,000 or 200,000 share trade. But since the advent of what's called high frequency trading, they have to play the bigger traders have to play games where they do time weighted averages where it throws out a little smaller trades over time, so it's not as noticeable that they're trying to move a lot of shares. But I think the AIs can detect that and stuff. But going back to the point of this, obviously we're going to get back to Delphi in just a minute and how this story works. So I've been a part of this since 1992. In 1992, 1200 baud modems were all the rage. Thank God we have 1200 baud. And then shortly after that became 2400 baud. So you can imagine that for people to get this market data was near impossible. It probably wasn't that long before that it used to come out on a ticker tape, like literally printed on a tape. So in the 90s, your choices for getting the real-time stock market data were to have a satellite dish put at your house and spend about $1,000 a month in 1990s money to receive the market data, including exchange fees in 1990, early 1990. You could pay a company like Signal, which was, some of you may know eSignal, but it was called Signal at the time. They had a FM receiver that would receive it over the air on FM radio, which, believe it or not, that was popular. You'd go into a $1 billion hedge fund, and there's a guy with like rabbit ear antennas taped on his window so he can get stock market data. And then shortly after that, they started to do it in the vertical blanking bar of the CNBC channel. So they were literally like desperate to get this data out to everybody before the internet really became a thing. And even at that time, if you didn't do the satellite dish, you had to do dedicated T1 lines. T1 lines, for those who don't know, is approximately 1.5 megabits of data, which is pathetic by today's standards, obviously. So back then, the software platform I worked on was developed in 1983 on a P Systems Pascal system, and I'm not going to be able to get this quoted precisely, but when I joined, the software company was basically shutting down and was in maintenance mode, and I was hired as a maintenance programmer, not knowing anything about the stock market. And but I knew Pascal. I had already gotten my Turbo Pascal 5.5. I had already spent a couple of years writing screensavers in it. I was probably right at the edge of joining the demo people. I had figured out that BGI in Turbo Pascal 5.5, which allowed you to do graphics, sucked, and was going down to the interrupt level. There was I believe in Turbo Pascal 5.5, there was an ASM command. So I could write the Pascal structure, and I could write an assembly, the actual assembly codes that I needed to write, like to switch the video interrupt to 256 colors, and then to go and to control the color palette without actually having to write an object file and all that other stuff and link it. So that kind of is the beginning of our toe into Delphi, because before that, it felt like C or C++ was really your only way to play around with pointers and memory in any meaningful fashion. But I quickly found that Pascal at the time, Turbo Pascal, was able to do stuff in a meaningful way performance-wise. And I forget what version, if it was 6 or Borland Pascal 7, where we had the CPU view of the code that was generated. So
7,
I was
definitely.
It was definitely 7. Okay.
Right.
So the interesting part about that is you'd say, well, the assembly code isn't that important because I'm writing in Pascal. Well, it actually is, because if you understand assembly code like I did, because I had already cut my teeth learning assembly because 286 computers sucked, and you needed every possible ounce of performance you could get out of it with 4 megabytes of memory. Again, I love throwing out this dinosaur knowledge just so the kids today can say, holy crap. Yep, that's right, Mark. Back then it was called TurboVision, was the windowing system that was included with Turbo Pascal 6.6. So so what happened is I hooked into Pascal's ability to do assembly code and pointer manipulation, which is really one of the luxuries, I think, of C++ that everybody enjoyed. And C was you could manipulate pointers, which was fast to do things. There was, TurboVision. So, but yeah, and to branch off on TurboVision for just a minute, that was an event-oriented windowing system, but the software that I was working on couldn't wait for the event system to be done. It had to control the event system. And Turbo Power made a windowing system, and I forget what it was called. I know somebody in the chat will know, but it was a windowing system that that was used before I got there, and it didn't work very well. But TurboVision was so inspirational, I wrote my own windowing system for DOS, and then we would switch to BGI for the graphics. And we started to basically, and we only had 640K of memory to do stock market analysis software. We could only do like 500 symbols at the time. So we would basically have to filter out whatever came from the data feed and process just the 500. Because we didn't have publish subscribe necessarily. You just had the whole raw feed you had to process. But I don't want to hang out too much in the old days. I think that's right, Object Professional. Was the windowing system. But it was interesting because I wrote my own windowing system going to the memory address of the video cards, and we were able to do dual screen back then because the text buffer was at, I think, B800, and the monochrome screen was at B1000. So I could do character attributes for the monochrome screen and the color screen at the same time for text. And so that gave our users multiple screens. And we were in some big trading firms in New York at the time too, because it started to grow on it started to grow by word of mouth. There was no marketing, there was no sales department. It was just the owner and me in the basement of his house cranking out code. But we didn't tell anybody that. We would answer the phone Insight. We wouldn't give away titles. We would just solve problems and move on. And so from the customers that were left from when I started, they started to branch out to other trading firms, and they'd say, I can't trade here unless I have Insight. And they'd say, what the hell's that? Call these guys. And they'd call us up and they'd sign up and we'd get more customers. So it was really great because that's why I left Toshiba as a corporate job, was because the trading software platform had grown enough that it was a full-time job for me by then. And I was limited by my boss to 50 hours a week, which was nice. But so the point, going back to the Pascal stuff. So when Borland Pascal came out, we were able to get 16 megs of memory. And that meant, yes, Chris Peters, that's right. The addresses for the old text mode color and the text mode mod, IBM PC. So
Shows
in
people's
Turbo
ages.
Oh yeah. So when we went to Borland Pascal, we were able to go into protected mode, which gave us, and we had some EMS memory extenders so that we could get access to more memory. But really, the protected mode allowed us to address 16 megabytes of memory freely, and we didn't have to play games going through XMS or EMS windows, paging, and all that other stuff. So we ended up. Ron Roth was a user back then, by the way. So when he makes a comment, he lived that. He was on the other side of what I was doing, and he's in the chat. So anyway, the point is that we were very bleeding edge because I was hanging out watching the code that the Pascal code would generate in assembly, and then I would either optimize the Pascal code to make the fastest possible assembly generated, or the machine code that it would generate, or I would just write an ASM command and write my own assembly code to make it faster. And by then we're at 386 and 486 levels essentially of processor performance, and we're squeezing every ounce we can out of it. And what I didn't realize was going on, and again, we're in Turbo Pascal, Borland Pascal, we're a two-person company, and I started to find out that we were competing against companies that had 40 programmers, marketing and sales teams, and they'd go into a trading firm, and the trading firm would say, well, why are you using these guys? They're in DOS. And they'd say, if you think that matters to us, get the hell out of here. And they would literally kick the sales guys out because their software products could not do the scale of what we could do, which wasn't very much by today's standards. Load high, yeah. So at any rate, we were just kind of with blinders on, and I was just spending years of my life essentially writing code, trying to figure out the most optimal way to write code. And I hung out in Pascal. I had some friends that said, hey, why don't you go to C++? And I'm like, I tried a couple of things over there, and it felt like it was a little bit wilder in the sense that Turbo Pascal or Pascal was very strongly type checked, and we could not. The compiler would catch my bugs that C++ or Visual Basic wouldn't. My favorite one was in Visual Basic. When I was at Toshiba, I did something. I accidentally named a variable. I misspelled a variable name, and it took me days to figure out that I'd misspelled the variable name because I was so used to Pascal always saying that variable doesn't exist. And yes, you can turn on those flags in C++ now and so forth. I don't mean to say that still is a delineating difference. But the interesting part about it was as I was watching the marketing teams from Borland, Emprise, Borland, Code Rage, Code Gear, etc. The big thing that they were going after over all those years was this width of a product, which Delphi has in its box an amazing width of tools that it can do. It includes charting in there, for instance, with T-chart. It includes database components. It includes access to Firebase, to MySQL, etc. Back in the Delphi 4 era, even. So I don't know how much fun this is for people, but I'm just going to rant on it a little bit more. So
no, you need to keep going. I think everybody is here explicitly for what you're saying, and it's working out pretty well.
So because the thing about this is I've never stopped using Pascal Delphi to do this. I've never found a brick wall that says I can't do this anymore. I have to switch languages. So the migration of this thing was, as I took over the 1983 code, it was procedural based, no object oriented. Object oriented was introduced in Turbo Pascal 5.5 when I just started learning to program. And so I was born in the object oriented era, and I was taking data structure classes and learning about object oriented and methods and etc. And even to this day, by the way, kudos to the Delphi team for still having the object keyword as a viable option in the compiler. We've moved on to classes. There's a great little discussion I'll have later on about records versus classes and performance. But the interesting part was, over all the years, I just haven't really found that brick wall that says I got to leave, other than maybe doing FPGA programming or trying to get into some hardware programming that Delphi doesn't get into. GPU programming is probably the one thing that I haven't had to get into yet that I wish Delphi could do. And somebody's probably going to say in the chat, "Oh, you just do this," but as far as I know, it doesn't work right now. But the big thing is that I was taking this product from 1983. We were shipping it out to the customers every year, and I was what became known as refactoring this code and upgrading it to object-oriented architecture. It was 64,000 lines of code when I started. It was 500,000 lines of code by 2000, and by then we had also split into 3 other products. And in around Windows 98, I made the decision that we had done enough object-oriented code and everything that it's time to go to Windows. It was Delphi 3, I think, when I started to migrate to Windows. And I had about 128 DOS windows that were built in my windowing system, which even had shadowing and a mouse on it and everything. And you could rearrange them. You could run the mouse across the bottom of the Chrome screen and the color screen. And so I basically, records, object, class, yeah. But there are costs for each of those. So the thing about it is that I was releasing code that was I don't want to say experimental, but it had been beta tested we had enough customers. We had over 1,000 people using our software in one way or another. And this stuff's mission critical. People were making, financial decisions based upon this thing running. And the feedback that we're getting in the field is, hey, the market just went crazy. eSignal is 15 minutes behind the market. Nobody has any idea what the actual price of the stock is or what the bid and offer are. And they're placing orders based upon 15-minute-old data. And people are crowding around our terminals to find out what's really going on in the market, and then going back to their execution terminals and making their decisions. So that's how I knew that I was on the right track, even though I was using Pascal or Delphi, because we're a small shop. We were a small developer, essentially. And I was managing 500,000 lines of code and releasing it all the time, quite frankly, as beta. I had people that were calling up and saying, "Oh, there's a bug. This doesn't work." And I would literally, in about 5 minutes, fix the bug and send them an exe through PC Anywhere, which that dates the timing, to be fair. I don't use PC Anywhere today. But that was amazing because we used to have to FedEx floppy disks all the time. 3.5-inch floppy disk.
Oh boy, don't you give me PTSD now.
So yeah, I mean, and that was just accepted. We had a customer that forced our arm into PC Anywhere. Loved that guy. He was a blind person that traded the stock market. Oh. Amazing guy. I forget his name right now, but we were very personal with all of our customers too. They would call us up. We'd say Insight, and they'd say Jim. I'd say, "Hey John, how you doing?" Like, we had that kind of voice recognition when they called us. That was another reason why they liked us, because we were very personable, and we were not trying to match features of anybody else. We weren't looking at anybody else's software. The traders would challenge us, and I would figure out a way to take this abstract platform now and design it so that they could implement their intellectual property without me taking their intellectual property into the platform. And you could think of it like a programming language, right? Just because I wrote a program doesn't mean it's built into Delphi, right? But Delphi as a language is a place that you can do this. So anyway, so we start to transition to Windows around Windows 98 and Delphi 3. And so the first thing I do is I realize, aha, Windows has this console window that I can hook into with Windows handles, and I can go. Delphi didn't have any support for it whatsoever, other than the write line, read line stuff. But I found out that I could go in with DLL calls to the Windows API, and I could control the console. I could write buffers to the console. I could read buffers from the console. I could get the mouse location from the console. I could, do whatever I wanted with the console. And so I said, hey, I've got 128 windows now that this application is up to with its old DOS architecture that I had made. And I got these charts that are BGI based. So the first thing I did was I made a console window that emulated the B800, B800 address. And it would just, it had a thread that would run and write it out to the Windows console window. And I thought, oh, this will be great. We'll go back to the old scan lines, where it goes, writes one character at a time across the screen. But no, I optimized it to where everything would blur. And since we weren't doing any interaction with the Windows API on the console window waiting for those callbacks, it flew. It really cut through the market. It was just amazing how performant it was. And by then I had also had the main application on a separate thread. So the GUI thread was left to run Delphi GUI stuff. There was a thread running the old DOS application, if you will. All 128 windows still worked perfectly, and they showed up on so they would show up in the console window. And then we had these charts that I had to build from scratch using Delphi's VCL. And I quickly learned that I didn't have to use Canvas and stuff like that. I could just go right under the hood to the Windows API and do direct calls to text out and line to, move to, and all those other things. And I built these high-speed charts that essentially you would link to the alert window. So as the trades are going, the charts would go. So I'm sorry for the sound effects and the goofy enthusiasm, but blur. It was so cool that I basically was doing blur. And at one point, I talked to some of the customers about it. I said, well, you say you can't read the numbers. And the guy says, yeah. He says, but I want it that way. And I said, why do you want to not read the numbers? He says that the numbers blurring is indicative of the activity in the market itself. It's telling me that the stock is really active because I can't read the numbers. He says, I can read the numbers. It's just I can't read the numbers. And he wasn't trying to get a bug fixed. He was saying, leave it alone. I like that. So the next step, after I got the charts done and the console window shipping into the field, all hundreds or thousands of people using that version of the software, loved it. They basically had a big, I even figured out how to take the console window and put it into 132 columns by some sort, like 80 rows or something like that. So I had lots of text up there, and I still had my text-based windows that would float around with the mouse, and they had their shadows working. So it was great. I didn't have to update 128 windows is the point. The next step was, okay, multiple screens. Now we got to be able to break this thing out. And I'm like, oh crap, here we go. Now we got to do 128 windows of rewriting code. And then I thought about it, and I had built an abstraction layer for the DOS windows in such a way that even was still performant and based on a concept of TurboVision, but not TurboVision, that I made a form come up with probably a custom paint box that essentially was a terminal emulator. And through some magic of code writing with buffers and everything else, all the windows now could float across any window on the screen without me touching the windows again, without me touching the code for the windows again. And releases go out about that. And people could have 4 or 5, how many ever windows, like 4 monitors was like pushing the edge in the early 2000s. Yes, it's exactly. I did invent everything that I needed because this wasn't normal. You didn't do this with Pascal and Delphi. You were solving a problem, and hardware would be thrown at the problem, not trying to squeeze every ounce of performance out of these things. So anyway, that basically became what it was until 2007. when the company was sold off and the separation began for me. The interesting part was that I did build a Delphi server that basically would take the alerts that were coming out of the system. I didn't talk much about the software too, but basically the idea is that the user goes in and he writes like a single line of text that represents what he's looking for on the market. And he says like the high is greater than the high for the last 10 days. He just would write that out in like algebra. So I'd written a parser, lexer, compiler, parser being a formula parser. No, it's not an open source, guys. The company that bought it would never do that. That's later on in the story. So bottom line is that and I don't even know how to do open source. I can't even get through the legal agreements on that. So anyway, point being is that the traders could put their stuff in there and it could be anything that they wanted it to be. The screen came up blank with a menu bar, and then they would basically they would custom design whatever they wanted it to be. And it had time and sale windows, so you could watch those hundreds of thousands of trades scroll by real time. You could even open up a window and see the raw market data feed scrolling by, which was insane as to how much data we're processing. And I think in about 2007, we were probably processing 100 to about 100,000 messages per second by then. And we were up to maybe 16,000 symbols was the limit at the time, because it had all been written in 32-bit or in DOS. We weren't taking advantage of a lot of the new language features of the environment. So basically, the whole time I'm doing this, I'm again squeezing every ounce of programming performance I can get. We're still in Delphi 4, and I went through and built a server to manage all the workstations, and built TCP communications, UDP communications, IP multicasting communications. And a quick story on that is Sunrun, I think was the company. Not Sunrun, that's a solar company. There was a company that was basically like TIBCO. I'm sure some of you guys have heard of TIBCO. Back in 1998, Windows 98 was the first operating system to include multicasting as a standard feature in the operating system. So that meant that prolifically every system that was out there that had Windows 98 had IP multicasting, which is the way you need to distribute market data. Cable TV is a multicast. It's, like when you have an aerial up on your roof, there's one signal being sent out to millions of households to watch the same TV channel. The internet is a huge Ponzi scheme in a way, because it's like every TV costs bandwidth, which means that the entire system is taxed every time somebody wants to watch a 4K video of somebody getting kicked in the you-know-whats. So essentially, IP multicasting was this new thing. And the oh God, these guys. So anyway, the IP multicasting was this new thing. And there was this company that did lectures on it. So I tracked down, and remember, we're still like in the early ages of the internet. So I tracked down the company. I tracked down the company that was giving these lectures. I said, okay, tell me, how does it work? How does it work? We don't know how it works. And I'm like, what do you mean I don't know how it works? What code do I have to write? They're like, we don't know what code you have to write. So I paid $35 to Microsoft, put in a support ticket. Some engineer called me that was talking 100 miles an hour. When I talked to him on the phone, and he would say things, and then he'd pause to let me respond, and I'd sit there for like 30 seconds trying to slow down, like the old FBI playing back a recording of the mobsters talking. Sorry for the sound effects. And I have to slow down what he said. And he gave me, because I had already done TCP communications with WinSock layer communications. And he said, so he gave me some sample code. He explained it. And it was literally like 2 lines of code I had to add to the WinSock to do it. And then there was this company, I don't want to mention their name. Basically, they sold a DLL plugin to any application that cost you $1,500 per instance to receive multicast data from their package that they had. And so they could basically, they had a put the data in messaging platform, get the data out kind of solution. And I had done it for 2 lines of code. So, kudos to me for being able to grow my own in a way. because obviously cost was a big deal at the time. I think we were only charging like $500 a month for the trading for the trading software. So anyway, and then so we did that. We did a server that manages all the workstations. It actually handled the distribution of the workstation EXE programs because these were EXEs that ran on the traders' desktops. They were basically dedicated desktops. By then we were Ethernet, UDP multicast, UDP protocol, and I'm sure my internet guys out there would say, "Hey, UDP sucks. It drops packets." Yeah, if you have a crappy network. We had dedicated networks. We did dual homed computers so that there was just a computer for. Yes, that's right, 500. So
Wow.
we're talking like 90s and 2000s, and we were probably bringing in $1 million a year in revenue.
Gee.
And I mean, it was, and the thing is you think $50, $500 is funny. So the server, okay, I'll finish the story. So the server essentially managed the workstations, and we trained the techs at every office how to look at the server to see what was going on. So every day they could go on there, all green lights, everybody's good. They take them 2 minutes to check and make sure everybody's running every day. Oh, somebody's not running. They could do some remote things to get them going. They could just go to the guy's desk and say, "Hey, start up that software." They could PC anywhere into the guy's desktop and start it up if they needed to. We basically had to adapt because, again, still two guys for 15 years. And we're managing all these people mission critical. But what we did is we offset the support to the firms so that the people who were on the support desk there could handle the traders. And then we became like level 2 support, essentially. So they'd say, "Hey, we're going to add another workstation." And they'd say, "We're going to turn it on tonight." And we'd send over a new entitlement for it. And that was it. They'd handle building the computer, whatever. So we did that, and then it came to we needed a way to distribute these alerts that didn't require the heavy workstation. So we built this satellite product, like the workstation was the TV studio, and the satellite product was like the TV set. You could watch whatever channel you wanted, or all the channels at the same time. But that was a complete ground up write with VCL and Windows and Delphi, and so that program, we charged $50 a month for it. And it was light. It was intelligent. It could actually use IP multicasting to check and see if any of its friends were on the same subnet. And if it was, one of them would take the data feed in and multicast it to the other guys. So we didn't even have we didn't have that TCP Ponzi scheme. I shouldn't call it a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, you should.
but we didn't have that TCP cost of every user, essentially. And again, I built all that code myself on top of the WinSock layer of the Windows API. And all in Delphi. Everything was written in Delphi. The only thing that wasn't written in Delphi, I hired a guy who was a networking guy to build a TCP DLL that would distribute that would handle I think we had in some cases 200 clients connecting to one server. And his little thing that he built me would handle the distribution to all those 200 clients. And we were getting constant feedback from people. My favorite one was we had 4 phone lines, 2 for modems, 2 for phone calls, and we had it set up to where it would roll over. If line 1 was busy, it'd go to line 2, and if line 2 was busy, it'd go to the first modem line, and if that line was busy, go to the second line, the fourth line. So we only had 4 phone lines of incoming calls, and so anytime the phone rang, like less than a ring, we'd pick up the phone. And so if there was a problem in the field, we'd get that call, we'd answer it, okay, and we'd start calling out, and the lines would start lighting up. And we had a messaging protocol that we would send out to everybody through the program that would say, "Up, your market data feed's down. The tech department's working on it." And then all of a sudden, all the phone calls would disappear. Like we're talking like sub minutes that all this stuff would be turning around, and then we would basically turn around and say, "Hey, okay, we lost the market data. Double check your alerts." And these guys didn't care about playing back the market data. They needed the alerts real time, and they could compensate real time once they knew to do that. Not the alert was going to be corrupted, because they didn't want to spend 20 minutes catching up on the data that they had lost. So it was really a tight run ship. Virtually would call us, and then the company was And then the last thing we did in 2003, after profusely saying no, absolutely not, never do automated trading, somebody opened up their checkbook and gave us a blank check and said, do it. And they said, I will sign any legal agreement your lawyer hands me. I will pay whatever it costs. I just want your software to do automated trading. So we built an automating platform out of this analytic platform. We got the main firm that we were working with to take their fix engine that they had developed. I developed a protocol because that's just what I do, and basically gave them a specification, which is fun as a programmer when you have to adapt to somebody else's. So the bottom line is that we ended up it was great. We married up with them. We'd send over our order. We had paper trading for a few years before that. And that's why the guy got excited about doing automated trading. So we ended up placing the order, getting the feedback that the order was placed. It's because this is another step of understanding trading now, because what you're talking about is you'd make the decision to place the trade, going back to what I said at the beginning of this conversation. Well, our software is helping you make that decision because we're monitoring the market, not 5 symbols, not what you could see in a chart. We're monitoring the market. And you've written your rules that narrow it down to the symbols that have this pattern that you're looking for. And your windows are scrolling by, they're beeping. By the way, I hooked into the MIDI on the sound card because that was faster than playing back audio samples. And it would go bong, 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 bong. And I could have multiple instruments and helicopters and all kinds of fun stuff. So anyway, the point is that, sorry, I gotta digress on that one again. So one guy had licensed our software, and all he had was new daily high and new daily low for his alerts. And the new daily high would go bing, bing, bing. And the new daily low would go bong, bong, bong. And he would just have it in the background and it'd go bing, bong, bong, bing, bong. Sorry for the crappy sound effects. So we're on the phone with him, and all of a sudden you hear bing, 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 bong, bing, 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 bing. And he's like, I gotta go. The market's going crazy. It's going up. Wow. Or it'd go bong, 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 bong. And it was like, this is what we did. We basically fed these guys whatever crazy ideas that they had. And so the whole idea was we were turning around the reason why they loved us and the reason why they were having trouble with getting to this from anywhere else is because this was highly personalized to exactly what they needed. Not like, oh, okay, we'll do a focus group and then we'll come back and we'll allocate the funds for this. In the meantime, I'm actually not only writing code, I'm also handling customer support phone calls and training. And so as a developer / trainer, my job is to make it so that they can't, so they don't bother me with repeated things. So again, I'm sorry, I'm digressing so much. I created a thing that I lovingly called Jim in the Box. What I had done is I had taken the rules that they had written and I reverse engineered them to English. So whenever they would write high greater than symbol, the high for the last 20 days, it would say in translation in English, today's high is greater than the 20-day high or something like that. So that meant that they could put a rule in and they could see what it was, they could read in English what I would have told them if I was reading it. And there was a lot of complicated functions in there that I'd introduced and everything that it would reverse engineer as well. But so I'd even made it to where you could take the rule that you had written and real time while the market's trading, you could see what was wrong with your rule. Why wasn't it qualifying? It had red lights and green lights for the different aspects of the ands and the ors. And needless to say, I can't show any of this, unfortunately, guys. Sorry, but it was I was just trying to get out from underneath the support by creating these tools. And one of the other things that got a lot of flack from the newer owners was I said that as a priority we have to fix bugs first and features come second. And the teams of like 5 or 6 programmers that have been working on other projects just balked at that and said that's impossible. I said, look at our bug list. How many are on there? And they said 6. I said, how many features do we have on there? He said 20. I said, you're not saying that we can't fix 5 or 6 bugs? And they're like, oh, I see. Because we always fix the bugs first because it's like this is my favorite analogy. In MIB2, Patrick, what's his name, is playing Will Smith's partner, flower sticking out of the grate in New York. And he's like, yeah, it's a little tiny flower alien. And he kicks the little flower. He says, come on, move along or whatever. It turns out it's a giant worm underneath the sewer that can eat subway cars, right? And one of the things, being the single developer, being my own QA department and everything, was I realized that any bug that somebody reported, no matter how small, could be a larger bug underneath. So I at least took the time to understand what the bug was and where it was before I would do it immediately or put it off. And there were so many times I had caught bugs that could have been something major. It could have been something bad. So anyway, sorry, more. That's, again, and as I'm doing this in Delphi, the Delphi compiler is compiling stuff pretty much instantly. So I never basically, the whole 15 years in the software. Yes, the iceberg effect. So I never ran the software outside the debugger. I was always in the IDE. I was always running in the debugger, and I was always putting breakpoints in and testing things when I was writing code. And I got into unit testing at some point too. And unfortunately, by the way, for all of you out there, unit testing is a great way to start developing things when you're developing pieces. And that comes later on in the story too. But the unit testing is basically your way that when you have a case, an issue, I know a lot of you will know this, but when you have an issue, you're better off building a unit test that causes the issue and then solving it because of the unit test, because that will never it'll never come back again. Because when you run your unit test as a QA step, you basically know that none of those bugs came back. So even though we didn't start from the beginning doing unit test, we did introduce unit tests. But unfortunately, for all the purists out there, I didn't do unit tests the way you're taught to do them and the way you probably should do. Do as I say, not as I do. I had entire things that were set up, and then it would just test out a bunch of assumptions and shove values in one test. So it would be like testing the moving average, for instance, and it would push a bunch of bar data in there, and then it would test the answer. And then that way I would know that I did the moving average correctly, or the stochastic, or the all those technical indicators. I think Insight had about 100 technical indicators in it, that whole product I worked on. And anyway, the point being is that we had this cycle where everything was great. We were on the bleeding edge. Customers were on the bleeding edge with us. And as Ron mentioned earlier, traders would complain. We got somebody says, you know how much money I lost today because of your software? And I'm like, oh my God, what happened? He says, no, it was down today. And I'm like, oh, well, you're equating your losses of losing money when the software is not on. He's like, yes, I could have made a lot of money today if your software was running. But the reason why the software was running was outside of our control 99.9% of the time. It was usually the satellite dish fell off the roof. Somebody sawed through the Verizon fiber optic line in New York City during 9/11. Like there's usually something major that happened, because a lot of these guys at these big firms, they had expensive redundancy and everything in there. So at any rate, so we got into automated trading. We adapted the engine so that it would do automated trading. We communicated with the platform. And then it worked beautifully. We did pairs trading for my trader folks out there, which is basically where you have two symbols that you know are going to trade the same, like Office, Max, and Staples, for instance. And then when they diverge, supposedly they're going to come back. So the idea is that you short one along the other, and then when they come back, you double your money. And for my trader folk out there, please don't correct me on that. I'm not a trader, and that's a good thing for everybody that I work with. So. Because that's a full-time job, to respect. So anyway, so the thing is that we built these amazing things. We had industry groups that were calculated real time, and we had news coming from the data from the exchanges, and we would parse the news, look for some keywords in there, and throw those out as analytics that people could get. And it was so it was an amazing time. And so the company was bought in 2007, and the company took over it, and I was there for a couple of years, and then they said we're going a different direction, and I left. And I was going to go into small business optimization because that's what I had done for 15 years, was basically optimize a small business with a lot of training from being technical support at the Toshiba laptop division for 2.5 years, working at a big company. Thank you, Bomb Diggity. And so the thing is that basically we had done what, when I look back at it, I should have been terrified of what we were doing, because we're going against these big companies. There was one time I went to one of our firms that had our competitor there and had like our little television product, our little alert distribution thing. And he says, "Oh, I'm paying $190 a month for this, for that competitor product. How much would you charge me for your full product?" I said, $200. And he says, "Wait, you're going to make me pay more?" I said, "We do more." And he switched over because we got him to guarantee to a certain number, obviously, for that price. But he switched over, and he was a good customer for a very, very long time. But the thing is that we weren't trying to be, and the whole time, no marketing department, no sales department. As a matter of fact, I kept thinking one of these days I'm going to come into the office and he will have been like, "I'm tired of this. I'm shutting this company down," because he was gruff, the owner, and if you got on the wrong side of him, he was East Coast, I'm West Coast, and the big difference for my East Coasters out there is East Coast people are very direct. If they don't tell you you are in place insult here, they don't love you. So the thing about it is that a lot of that, meet strength with strength, respect with respect, and but the thing is that there were times when people would push his button. I remember one day I was and he was in his office because he had the laundry room, I had the bedroom, which was tiled with desks, not like a bed thing. And outside was this view of the ocean. So I tricked my head just right because we lived in California. And so I hear him yell, "I am the manager. I am the supervisor. And if you don't shut the bleep up, I'm going to fly out to Florida, rip off your head and bleep down your neck." And I was like, "Oh my God, I gotta find a new job." And it turned out those guys were best friends afterwards. It's just confusing as hell. Anyway, need to keep moving on here. So the thing is that we were a very small company, very agile. And I always think that, as Ian says, my superpower is Delphi. I felt that a lot of that was because of the language of Pascal and Delphi, that we were able to do all that. That even though it wasn't meant to, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles optimizations that C++ has. I mean, even my Python guys out there, most of your performance in Python, somebody can correct me, comes from modules that are developed in C++. But Python as a language itself, I don't think it's very fast. It's fast, but I don't think it's very fast. And don't forget that the whole time I'm doing this, the whole time I'm analyzing 16,000 stocks real time, I'm doing it on a single thread on a desktop computer. I'm not even a racked computer that costs $10,000. Came later. And the only reason why we were on a racked computer that cost $6,000 actually was because we were running multiple instances of the program on the same computer. Because we could divide the core. We had like quad cores at the time, so we could run like two or four instances on the same computer, quad or 8-core CPUs. So at any rate, I'm going to just kind of take a break there and let you guys feedback.
I was going to say, I've actually got a few questions. So, Jim, are you ready with your unmuting skills? I think Jim has to do some. So, Jim F can be heard and I can be heard. So that's the way we like it. Jim McKeeth can't be heard. Cool, we have the power. Okay, I've actually got a couple of questions. First of all, I absolutely concur with the people that are saying on the chat, brilliant biography. In that we're having to fiddle around with the audio, and which helps keep us artificially quiet, is actually a really good thing, because it kept us from interrupting too much. But brilliant tale of development. I don't know. A biography sounds a bit odd, but you know what I mean. But a couple of questions that I've got. How did you manage risk, in the sense that you're dealing with people that are typically fairly well off financially, tend to have quite good legal departments, probably got a lot of people that are capable of, shall we say, recouping some losses by legal means. Was that ever like a concern? I mean, if something went wrong, did you have like a plan, or were you just hoping that nothing really dramatically went wrong and you didn't get sued from these people? So
we had paper tigers,
right.
But and to be honest with you, some of these people, trading. First of all, just a little background about traders. These guys are proud that they haven't left their desk all year. Essentially, they go home, they come back every day. The only time they're not there trading. These are day traders, by the way. If I didn't say that before, sorry guys, I should have said that at the beginning. But the thing is that these guys, they're at that desk. They make money off of every trade that they're doing. They make money off of listening to CNBC, reading their articles, watching the alerts come by on our screen. They have an idea, they program it in our software. So it's hard. So these guys are really, I know all of you out there have felt this before, where something has gone wrong and you're just enraged. You throw your coffee cup across the room. You hit your desk kind of loudly, or you flip your desk over and smash your computer monitors and everything else. These guys are the guys that flip the desks over and smash the computer monitors. Literally, the IT staff in some cases had to have keyboards around, and it would be like there would be keyboard keys flying across the room in some cases.
Wow.
Because these guys were, I mean, and you talk about risk. We were the ones supporting them. It's like we were the ones giving them exactly what they needed. And because we were never really saying no to what they needed, other than automated trading, which was the biggest risk, we basically were their buddy. We were their ally in this. Think of it like an arms dealer. The rebels aren't going to sue the arms manufacturer because they're busy fighting the war. And as long as the weapons do everything that they're supposed to do, they're going to be happy with it, as long as they get the support they need and everything.
I mean, my experience is, I work in the kind of human resources arena, I suppose, would be a posh way of saying what we do. But so we tend to be dealing with people that are running payrolls, and the people that call up for technical support, it's usually payroll day, and they've got 500 or 1,000 people, and something's gone wrong, and it's just, bug-free software is possible, but only if you've got 8 lifetimes in which to write it and a time machine to actually bring it back again to the current day. So typically they need to get a problem fixed, and you know how it goes. Sometimes the answer is, I'm sorry, this is going to take 3 days. I know you need to pay your payroll by 2 o'clock this afternoon, but the problem is such that it can't be fixed. There is no magic wand. Sometimes these things can't work. And a lot of payroll people have a backup plan, but not everyone. And so it can, let's say the conversations can be challenging, and I feel their pain, but surely there must be a set of circumstances that you went through where something is wrong with your software and someone is looking for someone to blame. One of the day traders is saying, I've just lost, 100,000, and it's because your software didn't do X or Y. I mean, you gave an example of a guy who said, hey, your software wasn't running and I just lost 25,000 or whatever. I mean, how was that something that you dealt with? Did you have some kind of, defense, or did you just say, if it happens, we'll deal with it?
Yes.
That's
the short answer.
The short answer is
we had tiered levels of releases.
Right.
So we had some people, the bleeding edge people would be on like today's release. And then we had some people that would be on, we'd have the people that we don't talk to that much that would be on older releases, maybe a year old in some cases. But every year the software expired and died. So they had to be on a new release.
Okay. Yeah.
Kept it. And the thing is it was a recurring monthly fee, paid quarterly in advance. So basically we had the money and we just had to make sure that they were running. So and so to hone in on your point though, what happens when something went wrong? 99% of what went wrong every time was user error on their part.
Right.
And the 1% of the time it was our fault, it fixed and released and put back in the field. And so if they discovered a problem, like I said, it's that flower in the steel grate in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody complained about one thing, all hands on deck. What is that? How do we fix it? Okay, it's fixed. Send him a release. Can't be any worse than what he has now. And my style for developing code when I would develop new modules was actually that the code would just be left dead in the version that I'm shipping into the field, which again, do as I say, not as I do, all my little young programmers out there. Because I didn't have GitHub or Git to manage my version control and stuff like that. I had pkzip. And but I had developed a style where I could actually release code into the field with experimental code in it. And I knew what it was because I was young and I had every brain cell operating on full tilt without any caffeine. So the big thing is that, and then what happens is to continue to go through your point. We have, we'll get to the AI stuff in a minute. The big thing is that you have a challenge, right? A user says, you missed this trade. And just so you know, I said there was hundreds of thousands of trades. He's going for the needle in the haystack and he says, you missed this trade. So at our worst case, we would go play back the data, his rule, put the debug point in there, stop it, figure out what was wrong. That was like the worst thing we had to do is literally get the market data back down here. It would take a day because we have to get the data at the end of the day. We have to transfer back to the office. At the office, we'd come up with what the answer was. But like I said before, I created Jim in the box tools. So what would happen is the guy would say, he missed my alert. I said, well, did you debug it? I'd show him how to actually debug real time. And what would happen is with the red light, green light thing, they would know, oh, it failed because my daily average volume was wrong. Oh, it failed because I said 1.2% and that was 1.1%. So that's how you build trust with your customers, is when you're right 99% of the time and not being arrogant about it. And at the same time, they don't need to call me every time to find out what the problem is. So they can, it's like how we're in Delphi and we can just go in and debug our code. We don't, when we have the source code for third-party libraries, we don't need to call them up to debug what the problem is. We can do that. Again, another plug point for Delphi is I learned most of my programming style by looking at the source code of Delphi and seeing how things were done in there. Thank you, whoever decided to release the I don't know what you want to call it, to the metal layer of source code for Delphi, where for Delphi. So I could go into a canvas and I could go into the move to line 2 and see that. I hope my Skype is acting weird. Hopefully everything's working. So anyway, the point is that everybody's looking for that. All the customers are looking for that one. I got you. And that's great because we came armed to respond to that. And when we were doing automated trading, my favorite one of all, we're doing automated trading through Interactive Brokers. That was the first platform we started to do trading with. And we're trading Chinese stocks or contracts or whatever they're called. Again, not a trader. And we would send over that we wanted to buy 3 contracts of this Chinese stock from the Chinese market. It would message us back there was 1 contract filled. So we would assume in our automated trading platform that meant that there was 1 contract filled. And then the trader would go, the automated platform would go sell that one contract, only to find out that he still had 2 contracts left. So we had to develop, and there's, when you're doing fixed communications, which is another little buzzword for all my financial people out there, which is a standardized protocol for communicating orders and executions between execution platforms and software applications. I'm not sure what you mean, Colin, but I'll expand on that, Colin. So the thing is that when you're doing this stuff, when you're at this level, you have to be able to have logs that show exactly where the failure was. So I got the logs of our system, what they said, what we said, and pointed this out to Interactive Brokers. And it was like such a niche thing that they were doing, they just didn't seem to want to fix it. So basically, the trader had to go into the Interactive Brokers platform and do that. Now, I don't mean to crap on Interactive Brokers. I think that they've been around forever, and they are one of the largest platforms, and they have built a pretty good platform for doing this kind of thing. The only problem is that when you need to go to scale, like currently I'm actually doing automation with Interactive Brokers, and it's just a bottleneck when you have to send over 400 orders in less than a second. That it doesn't work very well, and you have to go down to the fixed protocol, which costs $1,000 a month, and etc. Oh, so anyway, so that's the thing, to answer your question, and with the longest possible answer, that when you're talking about these legal things, when the company was bought, the president of the new company who bought us said, "Okay, do you have any complaints?" And I said, "Well, you guys said that there was a color that was wrong in the little client application." He says, "No, I meant Better Business Bureau complaints." And the owner and I looked at each other and were like, "No." And he just, his face just was like, "How?" And,
Yeah, because that's not normal.
it's not normal. But these days, like Mojang develops Minecraft in his basement. He's about to get married. He needs some money. He decides to release it, and the next day he's got $16 million in his PayPal account. That's not what we were dealing with. This was a hand process for every person, hand training. So every person was launched carefully and meticulously with the software, and they became customers for life. One customer's check stopped coming in. Turned out another customer sent me his obituary.
Oh no. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I wonder what happened to I forgot his name now. I feel bad. But anyway, the point is that point is that he was a customer for life. And that was really what we had, is that people had tested us. We had been put through the fire. And so these people would not leave us until we screwed them over. Until
Right.
in other words, we were married in a way, and my job as the developer was to try to take this crazy stuff that we were doing, this insane stock market data that was increasing every year, but the CPU power was increasing every year, and we were going to bonded T1 lines, data centers, cross connect cables, gigabits of data, and just keep it all together in a way that these guys would appreciate.
Do
And
you think you kind of missed those days when it was all, cut and thrust and working all these crazy schemes and stuff like that? Because once you sold the company and once they decided they were going in a different direction, I assume that was the end of your involvement with it. So
there is a loss in that. I
yeah,
lost every line of code I wrote for 15 years.
yeah. I mean, I've always
I lost all the tools. I lost any. Now I didn't. I had a naked man clause, essentially, that whatever was in whatever's in my head, I owned.
Yeah, yeah,
But the thing is that I lost all that work,
yeah,
essentially, that I had, because me personally, I didn't do the business side for myself very well. It was okay. Don't get me wrong. I'm okay. But it was hard to lose the kids and the wife and the house and the cars. And that's all figurative, by the way. I'm talking about my code.
sure, sure,
Um,
yeah,
and and here's one up for those unit testers out there. Everything I needed from that point on, I built in unit testing first.
Right, test-driven development in some way. Yeah. I
Now,
mean,
go ahead.
yeah, for me, I mean, I can kind of identify with what you're saying. I think I'm not the only one that would agree that code is a very personal thing, you know, and when you put your heart and soul into the code, if you are, I mean, if you're in a big business and you're just working on different modules, then it's a slightly different game. But when you are very much the principal developer of a product or series of products, then which is how it often works for me, I find that there's an absolute emotional connection. So I totally identify what you're saying about the wife and kids and the house and the car, because actually, when someone says to me, okay, we're going to get someone else to take over this project, you know, we're going to pay you off or whatever they're going to do. I don't know, you know, move on. Or I stop working with a particular company that I've worked with for years and they are doing whatever they're going to do. It is actually incredibly painful. And I don't think that, you know, that you and I are a particularly unique position there. I think that's also, by the way, everybody in the chat thinks you're either a time traveler because you've managed to zoom around the world and stay relatively young, or you've obviously had a totally stress-free life, or major plastic surgery, or actually you are some form of android that doesn't age, because everyone's like, hey, how does he got all this stuff from the 90s? He looks like he's very young. So, you know, kudos to you. You obviously got good genes, and I've got all the bad genes. It's like no hair left and stuff like that.
Well, they actually have done a study, and they found out that by feeding chili peppers to mice, that they could cause their hair cells to produce white, and that's it. So they did figure out how great, basically stress does cause gray hair. And I can only praise my wonderful family and wife that they are not programmers. And so they get my head out of the game. And I have to give kudos to the guy I worked for 15 years. He had a hard rule that 50 hours a week, and that was it. 10 hours Monday through Thursday, and then I'm sorry, that work. Oh, it was 12 hours Monday. Anyway, I had a half day on Friday essentially, but I worked way too many hours Monday through Thursday. So if you're the labor department, you know. And by the way, Colin, go out and Google Interactive Brokers Delphi, and I think you'll find something from HHS Software, which is a Interactive Brokers component that allows you to communicate with Interactive Brokers, and it implements the API for all that stuff. That's currently what I'm using for one of the little projects that I have. And I'm working on trying to implement their new gateway protocol. And it's written in something called Swagger, where my Swagger guy's at.
Yes.
And so they basically did the specification for the REST API in Swagger. So I'm actually, oh my God, there's so much more to talk about. So I'm actually developing.
Well, don't stop. You know, I think you're doing very well. Yeah.
So I'm actually developing a Swagger to Delphi converter, and basically it's going to take the job. But the thing is oh God. So basically the idea is, well, but the whole point is like the lines of code for the gateway in Interactive Brokers. You know, the JavaScript is like one long line, and then you run it through Visual Code and you hit save, and it comes out to like thousands of lines of code that describe the REST API calls and the URLs and everything, and the parameters and the structures and everything else. But I don't like implementing APIs. I do not like translating this text document says this, and then typing in the new source code over here. But the you know, the traders, Colin, you're asking some good questions. I want to go back to the stress and working with traders, and these guys were wonderful. They would bite the friggin' head off of the IT guy who hands them the phone that I'm on, and they'd say, "What's up, Jim?" And like I said, it was that was probably my biggest loss in all of that, was the relationships with the traders. Because a lot of times, even the boss of the company says, "Why are you talking to Rob about home theater?" But I mean, the thing was is that we connected with these customers at a different level, and it was so we were their partners, and we never took a percentage of their profits. We just took
Right.
our monthly fee, and we had enough people that were paying a monthly fee that we were comfortable. Um, but the thing is that going back to your question about the source code, yeah, Colin, in the old days, in Borland Pascal, was it when the source code was released for Pascal? The first time, I think.
Turbo Pascal, I think. Yeah.
Turbo
Maybe.
Pascal. But well, I don't know if it was 6.5 or if it was 6.0 or 5.5. I think 6.0 was the first time the source code was released. Point being is that we didn't have the internet. So remember, I'm a dinosaur. I'm from an era where we got magazines that were Delphi magazines, and we got a floppy disk if we were lucky with the magazine that would have source.
Cover discs. Yes, cover discs were awesome.
And we had to go to BBSs and download files for samples and stuff. Those articles were awesome. I mean, if you want to have an old mention, I flew on a plane back from Nashville from a Borland Developers Conference with Mark Miller back when Code Rush was in its heyday. That was the most amazing flight of my life. I'm not worthy. I love the guy.
Funny thing is, we've been doing this series on the blog, on the Embarcadero blog, about interviewing developers. And today, we normally publish them on Wednesdays. And today, for technical reasons, basically because we didn't have time, we didn't get round to one. And you have just done the most epic developer kind of roundup bio and interview all rolled into one, along with really, quite fascinating sort of cover of what the work was that you used to do and the applications and stuff like that. I mean, everybody is lapping up what you're saying. It's very good. And one of the questions is there somebody famous, or almost like a fanboy question, or hey, was there someone you met who you went starry-eyed over? And lo and behold, you just came up with that question spontaneously. So I think it was it's the right one.
Well, this is nothing to do with Delphi, but I was Donald Sutherland's personal Toshiba laptop support person.
Oh,
and
no.
that was, and the funny part about it, I'm sorry, not Donald Sutherland. Yeah, Donald Sutherland. I'm sorry, because Donald Sutherland was supporting his son's Kiefer Sutherland's laptop, and he called for his son to help him set up his laptop or something. And my manager came over and she says, Donald Sutherland's asking for you. And, I mean, obviously that's old. Yeah. And by the way, that would be the T4600 color laptop that was like $6,000 back in the day with its TFT color display. But anyway,
how the other half live, eh? Us mere mortals put up with the, not quite as fancy equipment as that.
So Delphi, and again, because this is really supposed to be about Embarcadero Delphi kind of stuff. Even at Toshiba, Delphi had an influence because for all the old school people out there, there was this thing called Lotus Notes. There probably is still in some form today. It was basically like Amazon Forms, where you go in and you make the form, it creates the database behind the scenes based upon what fields you drop on it. And Toshiba, a multi-billion-dollar company, had just adopted Lotus Notes, and we had service centers at Circuit City. Again, oh my God, all this stuff's dead like Radio Shack, right? And that's right, Jack Bauer, Kiefer Sutherland. So we had a inside sales team that was basically going to the companies and selling them the $6,000 laptops. We had laptops being sold at Circuit City, and all these service centers that were doing things. We had all this documentation. And again, we're talking 93 through 96. And because of my work with the application, I had worked with Windows help files. And I had this idea, and I said, hey, you guys have all this stuff in Lotus Notes. We could turn it into a Windows help file with hypertext. And they're like, oh, well, make a sample for us. And I was like, oh, okay. So I wrote a Delphi program that parsed stuff from Lotus Notes and formatted it into Microsoft Word. I'm going to get this all wrong, but you get the idea. And then essentially, once it was in Word, then you could output it into a a help file. And it turned out that the sample was loved, and they green-lighted me to do all their documentation up until 1995, essentially, for
Wow.
every laptop. And that all that data fit, once it was a compressed help file with the images, fit on less than a 3 1/4 inch floppy disk,
That's crazy.
which meant that they could send it out to everybody. But Delphi was key in that process of doing some of the file conversions, which I do a lot of that with Delphi today. But the funny thing is, they actually trademarked a name called Tech Access, and they had the graphics department come up with a graphic for it and everything, for a label. And our little support department was cranking out these discs. And I was told because we were part of marketing, I had just saved the company $250,000 in licensing
Wow.
Lotus Notes. And I probably was being cursed by Lotus Notes for costing them $250,000 in sales.
Well, they had plenty of cash. It's their problem.
Well, apparently they didn't have enough, because they said, you did a great job, Jim. Here's a $500 bonus.
Oh.
And I said, but this check says $362.50. And he said, oh, we had to take taxes out. And then they said, but you're not answering enough phone calls too. And I'm like, I just did all that. And they're like, well, we adjusted the numbers for what we think it should be. And that's when the writing was on the wall. And I said, I gotta.
Time to go. Yes.
And I joked with the guy with the trading company, because I didn't think it was going to go anywhere when I started with Toshiba. And he said, well, you could come to work for me full time. And there was like this awkward pause, and then we just both laughed hysterically. And then that became the conversation that pulled me out of the corporate sector and put me into the small business sector for the rest of my life, essentially.
I had a similar experience working at one place where, and I don't want to say the company because they were a good company, but I had to go and work there I was a Unix guy at the time, systems guy. I was coder as well, but I was there for 3 days straight after they had a major data loss, and recovered their system. No data loss. I managed to get everything back. And they kept bringing me pizzas and Coca-Cola to keep me awake and keep me fed. And at the end of it, they all came in on Monday morning, and I'd been there for the whole weekend. And they said, "Wow, you're still here? The amount of time you're here, you should come and work for us." And I said, "Make me an offer I can't refuse, and I will." And I didn't think anything of it. I went home, and it was like a 90-mile drive. By the time I got home, there was a message saying, "Oh, this company's financial director had called for you." And I thought, "Uh-oh, it's all gone wrong again." And they literally phoned me up and said, "I know you were kind of joking, but do you want a job?" And that was it. So it's the same thing. It's like, you should come and work for us full time. And I sometimes those are the best jobs. I worked for them for several years afterwards. And yeah, it's I personally, I prefer organizations where you've got direct contact with the people holding the purse strings and stuff like that. And I think in your case, that's probably what you were saying as well, is that the guy you were working for was actually the owner. Is that right?
Yeah, he was the owner. It was developed by a team of 13 programmers in the 80s.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. And they were selling permanent licenses for like $2,000 in the late 80s. And the company, there were lots of bugs in the software, and he ended up laying off everybody, bought out one of the partners, sold his house in Connecticut, moved to Orange County, kind of down and out in Orange County. And he basically was telling the customers, go away. And they ended up, I see your messages, Eric, by the way.
Yeah.
I can't respond to him quick enough. But the thing is he ended up calling, over here we have a community college called Saddleback Community College. And I was over there taking my Pascal courses and my data structure courses and stuff. And he called over to the college and said, I'm looking for a Pascal programmer. And they're like, we know the guy. And I was tutoring in the computer lab. And everybody's like, why do you keep doing all your projects in Pascal? And I'm like, it's cool. I like it. I told somebody once that if I can't program in Delphi, I'll just be a florist. But the reality of it, to be true, I have been programming in other languages. I did a lot of JavaScript for a year, and TypeScript and some SQL, even though that's not really a language, but it is a language.
It's like is HTML a programming language? That's the age-old argument. Fireship, which is a very popular YouTube channel. He has hundreds of thousands of subscribers, are all doing HTML and CSS with him. And he asked that question, and it's overwhelmingly a bunch of HTML web developers said, no, HTML is not a programming language. But
well, it depends on what's in there, right?
Exactly. What you need. CSS.
And I think that I've sit here purposefully and only reflected on the years while I was at that company and not talked about today necessarily, because today is harder to talk about because I'm in arrangements with people that I can't really discuss. But that's such old stories that I can tell you about it. But I can tell you that a lot of that stuff still applies today, essentially. That I'm my favorite, and I've talked about 3 programs essentially, EXEs. The truth is that I've wrote probably 50 programs, and Delphi was a tool to do anything that I needed to do. We had, I told you we had the 4 phone lines. Dialogic came out with a PCI card that had 4 telco phone lines in it.
These, yeah.
And the card was like $200. The API to the environment that you could buy and build stuff with it was $2,800 to buy that. And my boss said, hey, you want to make a little extra money? Why don't you go home and program a library? So I built a automated attendant in Delphi that interfaced with and I had to convert the C header to Delphi so I could get interfaced with the DLL. It answered the phone, it played a greeting, it recorded the phone call, and then I built a contact management system on top of Flash Filer. Turbo Power, what's up? And I that was a funny one too, because the owner had like a heart attack and he said, here's the Rolodex, bye. Rolodex. And I was like, oh my God, I'm running the company now after a few years of being there. And so he couldn't come in the office. He was restricted. Like that was it. He could pop in there and answer a couple of questions. So I basically sat down and wrote a contact management system because the phone calls were coming in. I needed to keep track of things. So I built a whole GUI, Delphi, DB, what do we call that again? What's the database stuff in Delphi?
Which bit? Do you mean like the data sources and all the rest of it? Or
yeah, data sources, T-dataset. It was built on the T-dataset stuff with the dataware controls and everything else. I've done that. None of my trading software has that. Sorry, Delphi. But but I built this whole contact management system, and then I integrated the phone call thing with it too, so that it would log the phone calls in the database. And I had a program that ran on all of our computers, and it was a little icon that would flicker in the tray whenever we had a voicemail, and we'd double click on it, and the voicemail would play back on our headphones. And so, I mean, the thing is not only am I writing and managing the software application for these people in the field, but I'm also writing tools and stuff to manage our lives and try to make it easier. Entitlement systems, managing distribution of licenses and stuff. We had to, every quarter, we had to send out a new code into the field. Otherwise, all the software would shut down. And that would be our way to basically say, pay your bill, please. But it was, it's like I said, it's just the tool of Delphi is not just the main application. There's so many other things you can do with it. And yes, I used it like vice grips. If anybody was thinking that, yes, Delphi is not exactly the right tool for every job, but I didn't have to learn another language to do another job. So
I actually used to work for Dictaphone, and they used to have Dialogic cards. They had a relationship with Dialogic, and I also have written a voice prompt system as well. But that was for something very specialized to do with kind of Dictaphone's business model. They do all the 911 calls in most places. This was back in the 80s, I suppose, and they could multiply record phone conversations way before a digital technology came along that could make that much easier. They actually had physical tapes that would go around, and then out came the Dialogic cards and made all of those things completely defunct overnight, which was welcome to the world of technology, everybody. Someone invents a new hammer, and that's the end of your business model. So, yeah.
Yes, BDE, that's what it was.
Yeah, exactly. So I think probably just a couple of questions, because we're getting up to the 2-hour mark. You've done an amazing job. You're probably, single-handedly answered 99% of these questions and been absolutely fascinating. I mean, I like talking to developers anyway. Jim McKeeth is still here. It's just in the background. We've got a little problem with our audio, so it works better if one person's talking at the time. But, you know, you are a very engaging and fascinating guy. I really appreciate you know, coming on and speaking on behalf of Jim McKeeth as well and Embarcadero. One of the
I do have a closing thing to say.
Okay, well,
because
one of the, just one of the questions I want you to address,
sure,
actually,
go ahead,
is because I think it's kind of super relevant. Russell Thompson asks, are there any suggestions on the best way to use Delphi to pull stock status feeds in real time, sources and components? He would like to build his own rules for custom triggers? That sounds just like the kind of question you probably got the answer to and nobody else has.
So, couple things. There is this. So first of all, I'm going to make this short. In 2010, the market data that we were getting from Interactive Data Corp, which involved a client-side processor, and then our computers processing the data that would come out of that, and it had to have another computer before it, and it had multicast feeds that it would connect to, dedicated lines, go into the exchanges, $20,000 a month to get stock market data. We were operating on a very, very, very professional feed, but not the raw market data feeds. So the stock market data is basically raw from the exchanges on these multicast feeds. And then you have data vendors that read that data and make it usable for other people. IEX has a data feed that's relatively inexpensive, but the problem is because the problem that you run into on this is how deep do you want to go? Because if you can process, small example of code choices, if you use a critical section today on a, let's say 6th generation Core i7, and you call the critical section, lock and enter and leave as much as you can do about 3 million times a second. If you use the Delphi T monitor, it's a lot less. It's like hundreds of thousands of times a second.
Right.
And so why do I bring that up? Not to bash Delphi. It's just like you have to be aware of these kind of things. You have to run your own benchmark tests and everything. But to give you an idea, I'm processing options data. It's literally millions of messages per second that I'm processing. So whatever you do with your code decisions, that's what I mean. That's what we meant earlier when I talked about scale, is you have to be able to make sure that it can scale up. So for the people out there that are asking questions about what data feed can I use and stuff like that, there are you can get data from Interactive Data Corp in some broken fashion, and it's what I call human readable. So the price will change on the screen at a rate that a human can read, and that is the rate that they send you the data. But that is not the actual activity. The actual activity is potentially hundreds of thousands of those updates throughout 390 minutes of a day, depending upon what feed you're looking at. And not that's like, by the way, I want to apologize. Earlier I said hundreds of thousands, and it's like millions of updates per symbol. I forgot to mention that hundreds of thousands probably does include the bids and offers. I think I was off on that scale. But the point is that overall you're dealing with a lot of messages per second. So everything that you're doing has to be thought of with this scale. And this is where Python and JavaScript and interpreted languages and everything else, they look great, because you're operating in a vacuum with like one symbol processing minute bars or hours, and you're backtesting it across years, and it looks okay. And then when you go to the real-time thing, suddenly all those rules that you've written are not updating once an hour, they're updating thousands of times a second. And so your performance starts to collapse and implode. At which point, if you're in C++, you're probably okay. But the point is getting back to the question. So that's like a little bit of the background about the market data. And the short answer is that there are some market data feeds that, so that market data feed that we were on was 20 grand a month. And you had to be at a data center, cross-connected to the feeds to get all this other stuff. Or there's a data feed called NX Core, that I've written a C to Pascal converter for the header that essentially gives you the market data over the internet through your cable modem connection. And you can the only problem is that it's the entire market. So you can get NYSE, NASDAQ, or Amex, or all the above. You can even get options data through it. But it's not good, and it'll cost you some money, but it won't cost you, tens of thousands of dollars a month. Because as speaking to the trader people out there that are thinking about doing automated trading or whatever, the biggest problem that you have is you build an algorithm. It makes money because you're testing it on bars. Like if you go into some of the free trading platforms and you test your algorithm, they're testing it on a minute bar basis for that symbol. And you basically hone in your analytics and everything else, and you can kind of see how that works. So then you get to the point where let's say you start there and it looks good, and then you start investing and you realize, I can't use that tool now because it won't scale. It won't do it across the whole market real time. So then you go and you recreate yourself in something else. There was a product called Deltex that's been pulled from the market. That product to analyze the market and to do your automated trading was about $10,000 a month, not including market data.
Wow, that's
for the platform to be able to do it. And it was a C# platform, and it had scalability problems. So I hear. And
that's an expensive lack of scalability there.
But and I want to be clear. This is the thing about trading, is that it is a very personal preference. There are people out there that only need the Russell 1000 or 100 symbols or 5. They don't need the entire market. What I decided to do was, and in the product I worked in the old days, you literally defined the symbols that you wanted to monitor. And you were limited to like 16,000, and there were more than that. Between NYSE, NASDAQ, Amex, Pink Sheets, and OTC, there's 22,000 symbols that I'm monitoring real time right now. Wow. in a single threaded Delphi 10.4 compiled application. And the level 2 stuff, oh my God, Colin, you're the trader. The level 2 stuff, what I just said about how crazy the market data is, that's level 1 data. That's trades and best bids and offers. If you go to Google Images and you search for level 2 time and sale, you'll see a window that has multiple color bands on it. That's the depth you see in the market. But the point is that data is insane. So when you can get access to that data, your level 2 data is up. That's where all the high frequency traders hang out. And to be fair, those guys co-locate their computers at the exchange with the shortest possible Ethernet cable as possible, even going so far as to do FPGA programming. So they're literally doing their programming on the network controller to try to make it as fast as possible. I don't do that. That's the one that would turn my hair white and make me look 100 at 20 years old. But I wouldn't mind working with some of those guys. But the thing is that that's like you're not even like, you're just trying to be ahead of people. You're trying to know what's popular and front run people, essentially, to get it before they get it, or to adjust your prices because you see it's popular before they can. There's a great article written by I think it's Michael Long. It's called Flash Boys. It was on the New York Times. It's about a 45-minute read, and he talks about the problem that HFT, high frequency trading, created in the industry, where when you would place an order, your order would go to multiple exchanges, but it would arrive at those exchanges at different times because of, one's Amex, one's NYSE. And on the back end, the high frequency trading systems communicated faster than you did. So by the time your order arrived at one exchange, they've already canceled their order at the other exchange.
Yeah.
And
it's a weird thing, isn't it? I mean, when you get into the kind of game where shortening a cable makes a massive difference financially to whole organizations and things like that, it's a very freaky world where quantum computing is going to come in next. As soon as someone comes up with a viable quantum computer at the right price, these guys are going to jump on it. because I don't know what the application would be of quantum mathematics, but I'm sure these guys are going to investigate it and have a look at it and go, oh, you know what, we can trade ahead of time now, or some randomness like that. I don't know how quantum computing makes life easier, but it is supposed to be so massively fast that it's got to be an advantage, because it's all about speed with this. I think is it seems to be the case anyway.
Yeah, but you're talking about, like Ron just mentioned in the chat, that these guys are highly funded, and they're just trying to scrape a couple of pennies off of every trade.
Crazy.
And so when you hear about Robinhood and you hear about Citadel, dig a little deeper on that. And that's an example where they don't need to make a lot of money off of people. They just need to make a little money off of a lot of activity. And there's nothing necessarily bad about it. It's an opportunity. It's just that opportunity used to be at the trader desk in New York level. Like a guy sitting at his desk could see these opportunities for order flow or arbitraging between different exchanges. And we would be able to identify that. We used to be able to identify because we could do pair symbols in industries, we were actually ahead of the other industry symbols. There's even a story I'm not going to get into right now where I did Bloomberg news feed. I processed the Bloomberg news feed, and let's just say that it was my software was faster than the Bloomberg terminal, not by a lot. But
someone said you paid $25,000 a year for, so $2,000 a month, compared to your software, which was at $500 a month, roughly.
Well, no, that was more expensive. But the point is that even that market data, the Bloomberg feed at the time, and this is like, I don't know, 7 years ago, that market data feed was going to cost $30,000 a month to have access to the Bloomberg news feed so that you could analytically analyze it and combine it with real-time stock market data. All doing it on a single threaded Core i5 desktop that was like $500, written in Delphi. What the hell, right?
People must have
How the hell
looked at what was going on and went, what do I know now? I don't know anything, because now this guy's got this PC and he's doing stuff that we used to have very special departments handling. And it's, I don't know. It's, I mean, I've also said this recently, that it's a very exciting time to be alive. The advances in technology in the last 30 years, and I've lived through most of these things, it's been an absolutely fantastic job. I never once regretted going into the development industry and stuff like that, because it's just something that it doesn't, just when you think you know everything changes from underneath you, and it's always mostly for the better, I think, and it gets an exciting world, really. Yeah.
But when you get into stock market data, just be aware, Colin, that the more granularity, the more information you're getting, the more updates per second you're getting, that's when you hit scale issues with most programming. And you end up where, when you're getting to that level of granularity, you're paying more money too. And so at some point you've built your, I told that story, you're building your algorithm, it makes money on a minute bar basis. And what always happens, what a lot of people don't realize about algorithms, and traders kind of understand this though, is that there's a maximum amount of money that an algorithm can trade. Us on the outside, us regular guys, and I say us regular guys because I'm not a trader, don't realize it, but some algorithms can trade and make 100% a year, but they can only trade a few $100,000 of capital. Some algorithms can make 10 to 20% a year, but they can handle up to $200 million in trading capital. And so that's what happens whenever somebody has an idea about how to do this. Don't get me wrong, in my lifetime, in the early 2000s was when the mathematician revolution happened, the quant revolution happened in the financial industry. Yeah. And all those guys were brilliant guys, but basically they're trying to curve fit the market. They're trying to take in weather conditions, all these crazy statistics to figure out what's going on in the market. They're running it through an AI algorithm, and then they're building algorithms from that. And don't get me wrong, it'll work. But the guys that I dealt with, they knew if the specialist on the New York Stock Exchange had a fight with his wife based upon the way that the bid and offer was being represented. I kid you not, one guy told me that. And obviously we hear a lot of people say crazy things today, but that I believed him essentially because he was successful and he made money.
It basically is the butterfly effect. that some of these things are trading in such a volatile way and so fast that actually a very small butterfly effect can have a massive change in stock market price. And as you said, when you've got these pair trades where one should match the other, one of them suddenly goes down because of some horrible event. Everyone goes, oh, well, hey, these two should track together. But actually, that might not be the case, because if it's some very small effect that very individually, affects this one trade, then the other pair trade, that gamble's lost. It's all just gambling at the end of the day. It's basically trying to use what's the word I'm looking for?
Technical analysis.
Yeah, that's right. It's an educated guess based on certain, factors that go into it, and it's better than a guess. But it's not that much better than a guess, and I think mortals like us that are not going off to our 78-room yachts and things like that and going, well, I managed to game the market, are never going to fully understand how this whole system works. But I think you probably got the closest to it out of anybody I've come across so far. You've been in there as the cog in the wheels that turns the industry, I think. So it's a very good position.
I was the man in the machine. That was my viewpoint of all of this. And I had, at one point, I could watch the data scroll by. I could literally watch all the trading activity scroll by on a screen with options too, which I know a lot of you don't know what options are, but that's like there's a million option symbols that you have to process when you process options, and they all have bid and offers and trades as well. But the thing is, tying this back to an Embarcadero thing, I'm not normal necessarily. I'm not the average developer. I had an environment that I was handsomely compensated, $10,000, $15,000, $45,000 of bonuses for innovation that came out of nowhere, was not expected, but was greatly appreciated. And so I was literally conditioned to be innovative. Like when I can go and like put a down payment on a house because I just got a bonus because I created Jim in a box, it conditions the employee to be good, to be creative. But the thing is that the traders on the outside, they're the real stars. They just needed the support. And Colin, one more point about the level 2 stuff. Exponentially, the data goes up exponentially if you're monitoring all the level 2 symbols as well as all the symbols. It just becomes a huge mess. And by the time I don't think Delphi could handle that on a single thread, but it did at one point, but I don't think it could today. And the thing is that by the time you've calculated what's valuable in level 2, everything's changed on level 2. So
it's like juggling Jello, basically. That's what it is. You just when you think you've got a handle on it, it's moved on. Too slow. It's moved on.
Yeah, that's pretty good, juggling Jello. So go ahead. I'm sorry. Was there any other questions?
No, I think you pretty much cover them all. My big question is what Jim McKeeth is in the background, because I see him answering questions, but not being able to be muted at the same time is a problem. Next week we will have this solved, because I'm sure Jim and I will practice at some point. Jim McKeeth will practice, and Jim Ferguson will not. He'll be doing something else. But you always say, you were just saying, we should get back to Embarcadero stuff. The point about TCoffeeAndCode is, and we try and reiterate this, that it's about discussing subjects that are relevant to developers, not necessarily talking about code and saying, hey, look, here's a piece of code that does something very cool, like a webinar. And I think what you've just done today is remarkable, because you have gone through a subject that actually a lot of people don't really understand very well, but also made it very relevant to what it is that we do. It is about Delphi and the fact that Delphi could handle things that many languages might find challenging, but not only that, as you said, your reason for choosing Delphi and going in that direction was also a sort of personal choice, but also a practical, pragmatic choice based on the capabilities of it. So I think nobody's got anything to apologise from that point of view. But I don't think we've got any other questions. So what I'm probably going to do is we'll go back to Jim McKeeth if he's still here, Jim. And
let me throw out one more comment.
Sure, go ahead.
So this is from my heart. I have actually gotten to know the people at Embarcadero personally. I have challenged the compiler in ways that I can destroy the compiler, essentially, and cause internal errors. And then I have to back up and code around it and stuff. Generics, the guys at Embarcadero, I feel, I don't know how to say this, appreciative, thankful, because I've had a 30-year run and still going, programming in the same language, just learning how to do things better, faster, stronger. And then the language changes and adds new features that strengthen me as a developer. And I've watched a lot of my Delphi brethren have to go to other languages because that's where the money is. Mm. And, so I want to acknowledge that the team at Embarcadero and Delphi has done something amazing, in my opinion, to survive this long. And it saddens me that Delphi isn't on every goddamn code selection of anything. It doesn't show up as an option. But I understand why it does, because nobody really understands what Delphi is except for a Delphi developer. So when I told Jim McKeeth that, the secret weapon of Delphi for me is its performance. It actually compiles comparable to C++. Not better. I'm not going to say it can kill C++. And there's a lot of things you can do as a highly specialized C++ developer that you can't do in Delphi. But it is a good language. But I have to admit, though, that a lot of my performance comes from not using the libraries that are in Delphi. I'm using the compiler and I'm using the language. And if I need to, I drop into assembly. The fact that the team was able to not just take this environment that had was kind of fading from the limelight as Ruby on Rails and all these other things came out, and go, oh yeah, we're on iOS and Android and Linux and Mac. Oh my God, thanks for that. Because I've had for years people saying, why are you on Windows? Why are you on Windows? I'm like, well, I haven't quite hit that brick wall yet where I need to go to Linux yet. And as it turns out, thank you guys. I apparently don't have to learn another language to go to Linux. Thank you guys. I can't wait till I have time to actually try the ARM processor, because apparently the Apple M1 processor is the fastest single-threaded processor of all of them.
And with WSL, Windows System for Linux now, weirdly enough, you can even run your Linux programs on your Windows computer. And I think that's where it really gets confusing, because if you do a Delphi program that gets compiled into WSL, then you've got a Linux program that was compiled by Delphi on Windows, now running in Linux on Windows. It's what? It's there's a little.
But without the team's support of the product, without the people that have dedicated, I know that there's people that have been there their entire careers.
Yeah.
And David I may not be writing code anymore, but he's obviously an anchor there. And some of these people know me personally from the conferences. David I think I still have a picture with David I and a piece of the Enterprise letter. Enterprise letter. But the thing is that I just wanted to say a big thank you to the team, because Delphi is a secret weapon, and but the weapon is not for abuse or for killing people. It's to allow people to move on to other expressions of what they need to do. So the fact that I can use Delphi for virtually anything I want to do, oh my God, there's a C DLL library that doesn't scare me. I go and I write it. I converted so many libraries that I made a C to Pascal converter. My one wish is that Delphi could just compile the C headers, but someday that might happen. But the thing, again, I want to just say a big thank you to the team that has worked hard all of these years keeping this thing going. And my thank you back to you is my maintenance agreement, and that even if I'm not using the latest compiler for some reason, even if there's bugs in it, I know you guys will get it figured out. And I love the fact that especially of late, that they have been focused on some very developer-centric features that we would need. Inline variable declaration is I was programming in JavaScript for a while, and it was nice to see
I
inline
hate
variable
that
declaration
feature
code.
so much. I hate it so much. But you know what? I was using it the other day for something, and the time when I realised how good it was when I saw Alistair Christie, who is really the consummate explainer of all new features. I mean, that guy puts out more videos per day than all of the other MVPs do per year. He's amazing. You know him, learn Delphi.tv, Alistair Christie, isn't he? He's a guy from New Zealand, but Australia, New Zealand. But he showed how you could declare a variable without giving it a type, and it would just infer the type, which was actually a very good use of line level variables and things like that. Okay, so we're going to have to call it a day. I actually have things to do as well.
Yes,
believe that.
Sorry for that.
No. I think that as I've said already, you've been absolutely fascinating. I've sat here. I'm stuck here, and I could get bored and do something else and pretend that mute the audio. Some people say, this is one of the things about remote conferencing is the problem, that people, their attention wafts away. But you know what? It's been absolutely riveting, and I think I'd like to thank you on behalf of everybody, because I can tell from the messages that we got you've hit the right chord there, and also appreciate you champion Delphi quite robustly, but also being realistic about some of the limitations as well, because nothing is perfect. There is no such thing as the perfect tool for everything, but generally speaking, as I always say, Delphi is my superpower, and on behalf of Jim and myself, thanks very much.
I just want to throw another reminder out there, because I see the price is high from Vampire KB. Embarcadero has addressed that by releasing the prior major version of Delphi as a community edition that's for free. And I got to tell you, whatever I've been paying for Delphi over all these years, the fact that I've been able to support my family for all these years, and I don't spend time learning a new language and learning all of its nuances. I've been in the same environment being productive. It's allowed me to move on, because I've been in the same language for 30 years. I have been able to move on from the language and solve problems. And yes, I get artistic in the way that I solve the problems with the language. But the price, when it's part of your income, it's a small price to pay. But I completely respect that there is a price barrier that people could perceive on that. But the big thing is that when you can send an exe into the field and it doesn't require 20 other patches to be installed, oh my God! I mean, that's if we didn't have that with Delphi back in the history that I've given you on everything. I did not say that throughout the thing, but because we were shipping monolithic exes, and Delphi's like, stop doing that. You're supposed to do packages. We did monolithic exes, and they just ran everywhere, every operating system, everywhere.
Absolutely, 100% agree. We do the same thing. You can take our client server product, for example, and run it off a thumb drive, a USB thumb drive. There are no other languages out there that are quite as efficient at doing that kind of thing. And people go, what? Well, what do you have to install? It's like, don't install anything. You can run it off a drive, or you can run it off a read-only CD-ROM if you want to as well. That's the weird thing about Delphi, is it produces packages that I think are underappreciated, and maybe that's partly people like myself's fault, I think, for not rattling the saber a bit more about the benefits of it. So.
But it definitely needs to be front and center for people that think there is a cost to get into the Delphi world, to see what you guys have arranged, because that was groundbreaking when that came out. I've pulled some of my trading brethren into the language to help me out doing these things with that while they're getting their algorithms up and trying to make money. And they're ready to write the check as soon as they start making money for the environment. And so to me, I understand that it's not open source, that it's not free, but there's an old adage that free is worthless, that essentially go to Google's graveyard on the thing if you want to see what happens to free. And but the point is, I just wanted to say that yes, you can get it for free. You can play with it. You can make exes that can go places. Obviously, you're under an obligation that if you start to make money, you should pay them. And I wouldn't be afraid to do that, because that means that you could. I don't know about the Linux thing. I apologize, but definitely it's like we need to we need to be freed up as developers to solve the problems, not learn new languages.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, I think a fairly positive ending to things. Appreciate it. Jim McKeeth is around somewhere. Jim, if you want to, you can unmute and say goodbye. But
I'm here. I'm just trying to eliminate the echo. So, yep. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Ian. Trying to figure out. Like Ian said, we'll work on this and get some improvements for next time. But I think I figured a few things out while I was listening to this great conversation. So thank you.
Well, thank you guys.
Oh, wait, I can reappear. Bye, everybody.